Thank you, Brandon. Well, the fight to slow the impacts of climate change is starting to take on a new importance. Some security leaders are now sounding the alarm that our national security could be compromised by a warming planet. Chris Conti explains why.
If you're like me, the first thing that probably comes to mind when you're thinking about climate change is maybe rising sea levels or perhaps more intense storms. But I was surprised to learn recently that everything that's going on with our climate is having a major impact on national security.
Quite ignorantly, I made an assumption about this story, that only in the last decade or so did we start studying the national security impacts of climate change.
In one way, it's a large social challenge because people don't always react to challenges that still seem somewhere off in the future.
But Ron Dole, an associate professor at Florida State University, was quick to give me a history lesson and some perspective.
The greater the instability of the climate, the greater the instability in the larger political landscape, national landscapes.
Right after World War II, scientists at the Department of Defense began collecting data from the North and South Poles and saw they were getting warmer. Why did the U.S. military suddenly care? Because the warming of the North Sea meant the Soviets would more easily be able to move their navy around the world.
So understanding what was going on, including whether the climate was warming, was really important.
I wanted to better understand the current day impacts of climate change on national security, though, which is where John Conger comes in.
Now, climate change is a today problem. It is something that is happening today, the impacts we're dealing with today, and they're only going to get worse.
He says more intense storms will not only impact the power grid our military installations rely on, they'll also be more tangible impacts on our armed forces.
As climate change proceeds, you have installations that were built with a certain expectation for climate conditions and weather, and that's changing. Sea level rise is going to yield more recurring flooding. You can't fly off a flooded runway.
Then there are the broader impacts globally. Geopolitical conflicts, war, and migration will all be amplified by a warming planet.
It's also going to drive instability around the world. And so in that context, they often call climate change a threat multiplier. It makes bad situations worse.
The Department of Defense is continuing to look at ways to make our security systems more resilient to climate change.
If you ignore it, but your adversaries do not, you leave yourself a blind spot.
When it comes to the broad-reaching impacts of a warming planet, though, it appears all assumptions should be off the table. I'm Chris Conti.